Goodbye, green screen. that's the magic. I don't know the magic screen, I guess. We are live. It is 11:45. Good to be back. Lisa and I went out this weekend. It was awesome. And we're back now. It's raining here, but you know, what are you gonna do? That's part of it. We're getting into that kind of season. But today, what I want to talk about is a cool subject. I'm hoping we want to talk about top speed. So we've gone over this a couple of times before, not in depth really, but what I wanted to talk about and what made me think about this, we're going to look at it in terms of Ford motors, but it could be any kind of motor. It doesn't matter. It could be any two engine families. Could be even two opposite engine families. Doesn't matter. But what really got me thinking about this is when we were talking about the Callaway Corvettes, not the Sledgehammer. Everyone immediately jumps to the Sledgehammer. Yes, we know that that's a completely just aftermarket kind of thing that they did. It's not a production car. But when we were talking about the factory Callaway turbo Corvettes way back in the day, back in the the late 80s or early 90s, and then comparing that to the then ZR1 that Chevy was doing, and they're making, they obviously have different power curves. The Callaway twin turbo had a ton of torque, 560 or something foot-pounds of torque. And then they had comparable peak power numbers. I think that the Callaway was in the 380s, and then later on it went up maybe to 400 or something. And so they had comparable peak powers. The question is, though, because if you look at a tune port combination like that, even though it would be making the same, let's say that the two, we're going to use a Ford example here, but if we have, the question is, if we have two engine combinations, let's say one's bigger than the other. An example that I'm going to use, we're going to use a 302 Ford and a 351 Ford. It could be any two. It could be our Callaway and our ZR1. Could be the same thing. But let's say that we have a Mustang, and let's say that the Mustang needs 400 horsepower to go 160 miles an hour, and that we have optimized gearing in it so that the thing will achieve the 160 miles an hour at the horsepower peak. So in whatever gear that is, let's say it's fifth gear. And so we have one combination, a 302, high winding kind of thing, makes 400 horsepower, but it makes 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. Okay, so it has a good sized camshaft in it. It has ported heads, has the right intake manifold, probably for 7,000 RPM, a single plane intake manifold, or a short runner EFI manifold, whatever you choose, doesn't matter. And then it revs that, and it makes 400. It makes the required 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM. So at 7,000 RPM in top gear with its 400 horsepower, it could make that Mustang go. It has enough power so that Mustang could go 160 miles an hour. Now we have an engine swap. And my question is coming up here shortly. Now we have an engine swap. We got a 351. So it's a bigger motor. It makes peak power at a lower engine speed. In this example, I'm going to pick 5,000 RPM. So let's say it could be a 383, 392, whatever you want. But let's say that we have a bigger motor than the 302. And now it makes peak power at 5,000 RPM. So it still makes 400 horsepower, does it at 5,000 RPM. We know that and has gearing so that the Mustang now could reach that speed at 5,000 RPM in top gear, because we know it takes 400 horsepower to go that speed. So both of these achieve that, and neither one of them make any more than that at any other RPM. So they both make 400 horsepower at their respective RPMs. One of them does it at 7,000 RPM. The other one does it at 5,000 RPM. They both have optimized gearing so that at 160 miles an hour, that where the 400 horsepower is required to push that aerodynamic signature to 160 miles an hour, both of them have gearing to achieve that at their respective horsepower peaks. So here's my question. With the 7,000 RPM combination, the 302, if we do the calculations, 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM is 300 foot-pounds of torque. That's how much torque it's making. If we do the 400 horsepower out of the bigger motor at 5,000 RPM, that's 420 foot-pounds of torque. So even though they're making the same horsepower, one of them is making more than 120 foot-pounds of torque more. My question is, we know that horsepower and top speed, we usually correlate that with horsepower. It takes a certain horsepower number to achieve a certain speed. We even have calculations for aero changes and all these things. Like I'm using this primarily for Bonneville and not for acceleration. We see a different thing when we're doing acceleration because it's not one number versus gearing versus aero load. In the quarter mile, if you're changing your ET, and especially if you're changing your mile an hour, you can do that with no change in peak horsepower. You can do that with just a change in average power. So, you know, the amount of power that you're making during that run, during those RPM sweeps, obviously, if you improve that, you can improve the mile an hour that you know, you can have more mile an hour that got you there. But when you're talking about Bonneville, you need more power or change in gearing to reach the combination of power and the the infighting between horsepower and aerodynamic drag. So on our 302, we've got at 7,000 RPM, we have 300 foot-pounds. On our 351 or 383 or 392, we have 400 horsepower at 5,000 RPM. That's 420 foot-pounds of torque. My question to you guys is, will a combination that has more torque there, is there a reason why it wouldn't go faster? Let me know in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. Again, remember, we have gearing so that it would go. So each of those will go their, they're required. The aerodynamic load at 160 miles an hour is the same because it's the same car. It's just that one is happening at a lower engine speed. In fact, that will be our poll too. We'll take. I will configure that as a poll. Near. Okay, if a Mustang requires 400 horsepower to go 160 miles an hour, does it matter if the motor is a 302 or a 351? You know, we're talking about this different RPM stuff. So the thing that got me thinking about this, like I said, was the Callaway deal. So we have a Callaway deal and a Tuneport motor that made, a gob, a whole shootload of torque way more than the ZR1 did, which you would think would help it accelerate. But the ZR1 also had gearing. And so when you look at the specs of them, they had what I thought was, if I remember right, fairly comparable performance for the two. I would have thought that in irrespective of the power curves and gearing, I would have thought that it just made me wonder if one of them was making 500 foot-pounds and the other one was making 400 foot-pounds, would we potentially see more speed from that? Could we do that? Would it be better served? But then it just gets me back to hey, look, it requires this much power to go this speed, so therefore it shouldn't matter at all. So I'm curious what you guys think if that would do it. Would we have to rev past the horsepower peak? Would the torque allow us to do that because we're making more torque and not horsepower? Does the torque come into play there? Is that a reading that we should consider when we're talking about, a peak mile an hour speed? Is that even a consideration? Does that not matter as long as the gearing is the same? If that's the case, if more torque would help us go faster, should we all be using, diesel engines there? All of this stuff. For me, I tend to think that it doesn't matter. I tend to think if it takes 400 horsepower in that chassis to go 160 miles an hour, it doesn't really matter how we get there, how we get that 400. If we got the 400 at 8,000 RPM or got the 400 at 3,000 RPM, as long as we have the gearing to do that, I think it's the same. But let me know what you guys think. We know that, and remember, we're not talking about acceleration because acceleration is a different thing. So average power production for acceleration is certainly more of that would obviously be better. But gearing would also come into play for that. So it'd be an interesting thing. We went through this a little bit when I posted up the video of the 408 versus the 4.8 or the 8.1 turbo versus the LS turbo and all that stuff. Or NA motors versus turbo motors, all of that stuff. So it's all good stuff. Let's see what you guys got to say here. Eric, Jet, what's going on? Alan in the house. Hey, are Thunderbird heads the same as Mustang heads? If you're talking about the 5-liter T-Bird heads, then yeah, they should be the same. The 01 was 375, then 405. Yeah, I thought it was 385 and then 405, but I could be wrong. 160 miles an hour to Mustang on 2 hands on the wheel. I did that a lot at the Silver State in my Mustang, and it was actually not bad. The bad thing is we went over 2 things. When in the road that they have there, it gets pretty severe weather, and so there are frost heaves in the road, and it was not good. So that you have big undulations, which are hard on the suspension if the suspension is not dialed in. And let's face it, it was not, because it was just aftermarket springs and conies and just the normal kind of bolt-on stuff. And then one year, what I did was I wanted to lower the car even more and cut the springs down and went down in the bump stops. And when you come down hard on the bump stops and go to if you come down hard enough on them, go to an infinite spring rate, it gets really darty. It's not fun. Yeah, happy Veterans Day to everybody that served. That's awesome. My Thunderbird has a 312Y block. They got their own heads, not Windsor compatible. Yeah, that's a different thing. Whatever one makes more power will be faster if geared appropriately. If coefficient drag remains the same. Yeah, there's not one doesn't make more power. They make the same power. In our example, they make the same power, and they have gearing to achieve that power output at the specific RPM that they want to make for that engine speed, that combination of engine speed and vehicle speed. And there's no frontal area change. It's the same vehicle in our example. And there's no change in weight, although weight's not going to make a difference in top speed anyways. Wouldn't more torque mean you get the speed faster? Yeah, but we're not talking about acceleration. We're just talking about what it eventually goes. How can more torque not go faster? Well, because if you do the math, it's a horsepower thing. I'm doing a 302 with a Summit EFI 500. What do you think? You can make a video of that. I don't know what the EFI 500 is. I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with that. More torque is more fun. Yeah, I would agree. Bigger motors, stroker motors, are a lot more fun on the street. Eric's getting the ads. Torque matters where an engine makes the torque also matters. More torque under 5,000 RPM or simply require less gear in RPM. I believe there's more potential from the higher torque as they both have 400 horsepower. I think a diesel-like torque Pontiac engines. Rovers in the house. Yeah, BS, did you get your Rover thing done? I remember way back you were talking about that. Near. Doug, I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Compare the torque curve at the wheel versus aerodynamic load versus mile per hour. If the slopes don't match, you will either not get there or hit a wall as you get there where they cross. Yeah, in our example, they both have the gearing to reach 160 miles an hour where they make 400 horsepower. 400 horsepower at 9,000, a lot less than 400 horsepower at 4,500. Yeah, I just went through the math on that. I believe the 351 would reach peak power faster, but would not go any faster than the 302. Have you ever seen or used or heard of deck plate spacers? Used to run a longer rod, to a lesser extent, more stroke. Of course, it requires sleeves. Yeah, Kazi did that. He did that. He did that with, he called them head gaskets, but they were 300 thousandths thick head gaskets. Power is power, horsepower is watts. Is the same deal with the difference being RPM and torque, volts and amps. Sort of power is power regardless. 460 would do it at 3,000 or 30, yeah, 3,000 RPM. Yeah, you can do deck spacers and then sleeve it. That's not. I mean, it's not ultra common, but it has been done. In fact, we were talking about doing that on a project that I'm working on. Cleveland production motors were more fun with 3.5-inch stroke than with 3-inch stroke. Yeah, because they made 302 Clevelands, right, in Australia. We didn't get those here. The closest we got was the Boss 302, which is kind of a hybrid. 90s diesel engines are known for being incredibly slow. Torque is one thing they generally did not lack. Yep. Torque at the crank is kind of irrelevant when gearing is considered because you're doing torque multiplication, so less torque. Multiply torque more with gearing. Yep. Rover got a 4.0 cross-bolted block. Looking at stroker options, I'm deciding a very long runner intake, aiming to fit a 122 or Whipple in there with it. So were you offset mounting the blower so that you could get lots of runner length on there? A faux deck. Yep. In fact, I have done that before. You might see that in the video. One of the classes that I was racing in, we had to have a B16 block. So that was their way. They thought of limiting us in terms of power. And what we did was the guys at, I think Darton had these. I need to go back and look. It might not have been Darton, and I apologize to people if they made, but somebody made a deck spacer to basically turn the B16 into a B18. So what we did was put that deck spacer on and then sleeve the block and then made our B16 into a B18, and then we ran I think we put an 89 millimeter crank in it. And then, so we made it into like a 2-liter, I think. And so, but it said B16 on the block still. So we could run it in our class as a B16. The Rover has an 8.2 deck. There's enough to go to 375 stroke. Brandy, what was your question? What gears would work best for what? Let's see. Near. Finally got to drive my truck yesterday with a new engine. Low buck truck is working well on the 6-liter. Lots of tire smoke. That's really all you want, right? That's kind of all we ask is more spinning of the tires. K swap, yeah, that would have been a different way to go, especially with a 6-speed trans would have been cool. And the K series makes a lot of power, but we had a 99 Civic Si that we had to have a B series in for what we were running. The blower's nested in the middle of the runners. I'm trying to use flat aluminum for the structure. Basically, the runners make a complete loop around the blower and into the ports. Okay. What gears would work best for 160 mile an hour Mustang? Well, it depends on what RPM you want to run. My Mustang had 308 gears on it and a standard T5 5-speed. And so it would go, I think 140 something miles an hour, 42 or 3 was only like 41 or 4,200 RPM. The car would go, so that was like 35 miles an hour per 1,000, I think. So the car would go, at 6,000 RPM would go over 200. Most interested in your opinion on a streetcar build, a 383 stroker NA or a 355 nitrous. Block is almost ready to go to the machine shop, so clearancing. I don't know why you have to choose there, because no matter which one of those motors that you build, if I was doing a streetcar and I was driving it around, low speed torque is going to be way more fun. So a 383 would be better, but there's no reason that you can't put a nitrous kit on the 383 also. The 355 and nitrous is whichever one of those motors makes more power NA and you add nitrous to it, it's just going to make more power when you have the nitrous. This gets me to 42-inch runners. That's a lot. I wish I could find some 247 8.8 gears. There is a 241 8.8 gear. They used it in the in a C6 van that had a 3-speed trans in it. That had an 8.8. So that is a factory gear, because we used those before. It was really too much for driving around because it, like I said, with the cam and stuff that we had on the 302 that I had in there with the Vortec on it, the car wanted to be going 90 miles an hour on the freeway to be driving correctly. Otherwise, we had to drive in 4th gear. Did you see Jamie explode another B series block? I haven't seen that one. Funny thing is, Rover forum trolls hate my recreational vehicle truck torque build. Hey, you got to do what you like, man. Do your thing. Yeah, a 383, it'd be hard for you to make the same power with a 355. And if you do, the nice thing about the bigger motor is that if you put together a 383, it's going to make good power, but it's also going to make a lot more torque. And to make the same power with a 350 or 355, you just have to rev it a lot higher, which means, less drivable camshafts and that sort of stuff. Between the 302 and the 351, 400 horsepower from either one it'll be easy to accomplish. The one thing is the 302, because it's lighter, will probably accomplish it faster. You mean that the engine itself is lighter so that the car would be faster, but it'll also make a lot less torque. So will the torque offset any weight change from the engines? But the question was really only about peak speed. All right, Eric, we'll see you. Yeah, I'll be on tonight. Are 327s any good to rebuild, or should I go 355, 373? Mine's peg leg right now. Yeah, I've run all of those gears, and the more gear that you put in the funner the car is going to feel when accelerating. But it depends on what you're doing. The nice thing about the Mustang transmissions is they got all kinds of, like, it had a 0.68 fifth gear, so you can still do a lot of freeway driving on that. Do you know of any of the sites or YouTubers who are doing the thick head gaskets? I'm looking at a 750,000 spacers. I've not found anyone doing them. Yeah, it's just a deck spacer with a hole in it. I mean, and then you just put the sleeve in, and the sleeve holds it together. You can even put, if it's thick enough, you can even bolt it in. Heck, you could weld it in and then machine it. Move the top half from the bottom half of the 1,000-foot mark. Yeah, that's a big explosion. T5 out of a V8 fifth gear is an overdrive. Yeah, it goes from a 1-to-1 to a 0.68. That's why I got a T56 trans, because it still had a 0.68 or a 0.62 or 0.65 right in that range, but it also had a 0.82 fifth gear. So you didn't have nearly as big a split for those, because I was always thinking top speed. I haven't looked at the gear splits on the T5s for the 4-cylinder, but I know that they had some. In fact, they had world-class transmissions that instead of a 0.68 were a 0.8 something, which would have put fifth much closer to fourth and not as big a drop. Quite honestly, for the Mustang stuff, unless you're putting, 3 or 4 series gears in it, most guys are not using fifth gear anyways. But and I was using it for top speed, and so it wasn't that big of a drop. But I do remember the big drop from fourth to fifth gear in my Mustang. I remember racing the Hennessy twin turbo stealth thing, and I could pull away from them pretty good the way that they had it tuned back then, and the way that my Mustang it was with the Vortec on it. That I could pull away from them when we would do roll races. But the split from fourth to fifth was such a big drop as that he would start coming up. And because the Vortec doesn't really make any boost, if it drops from, if you drop from 6,000 to 4,000 RPM, you're like, hey, look, it's making a whole bunch less boost and a whole bunch less power there than it was at 6,000. There. I'm saying the car would be faster because of a lighter motor. The weight of the vehicle has almost nothing to do with top speed. With enough torque, a 308 is good. Yeah, that's what my Mustang had. Sorry, the 241. I couldn't remember the number yet. 78 Bronco, the 400M. It was a boat anchor. Now I hear it's a baseline for some huge power gains. No, the 400, it's a stroker Cleveland, so it works good. Boss engines will make 1,000 horsepower. More cubes is one of the reasons I keep looking at going to a 408 from a 348, 230 plus cam fast. Took a lot from the bottom end, even with the 430s. What would be a good size turbo for a 93 Fox body? I've got a 96 351 with a Viper T56 and 355 gears right now. Just want something streetable and fun. The problem with the T56 on the Viper is the T56 on the Viper has a 0.5 6 gear, which is a lot, which is a big drop because they wanted those big V10s not running a lot of RPM and to try to get them to get fuel mileage. So that's a big split there, but T56 is still cool. But if you have a 351 in there, Alan, just tell me what kind of power you want to make. What is the desired power output? And then we'll pick the turbo based on that. Robot Canteen is doing powering an electric golf cart with an engine spinning an alternator instead of a battery bank, and doing that in some way for a while. 400M has a huge deck height compared to the Cleveland. Yeah, and that's why the intakes don't interchange. You have to do spacers to put the Cleveland intakes on them. Cold and wet in Illinois. Was trying to run a vacuum test. Did you ever try changing the front end to something more aerodynamic set? Does it make any difference for top end of the Mustang? Yes, it does. You can definitely change you can make the Mustang more aerodynamic. We had the Celine stuff on mine, and then we put belly pans front and rear. We tried different wings on the back. We did a lot of stuff to make it. That car would go 200. The other thing the Mustang has going against it, like mine did, is mine's a notch. So it has a really, the area back behind the rear window is not good. It's a notch, so it needs a sloped rear wing for the air to follow and channel down to back behind the car. Otherwise, you have a big low pressure area, which is basically somebody grabbing the back of the car and holding it back. So it's not just the front of it. And also the windshield rake on a Mustang is not good. You look at a Corvette, those kinds of things, it's obviously much better. Would my eCam become the choke points once I upgraded to AFR heads? I've just an Edelbrock Performer on eCam. I don't know what there are, if your question is, can you make more power with a different cam? Yes. I don't know. I don't qualify it as a choke point, but you can make more power. But what you're going to do is what you normally do with camshafts is you're going to make more power on the top and you're going to make less power down below, once you get to a certain cam point. You have stock heads. Yeah, the airflow research heads are going to be a big upgrade over the stock heads. At least you guys have sun. Oh, Illinois doesn't get any sun. Coyote versus Boss is only 1.2 liters for 1,000 horsepower. I don't really understand what the comparison is there. It may be more efficient, increasing downforce in the rear. If you're talking about my notchback, it's not. A notch compared to a slope GT is better, but the GT has terrible front aero on it, and it has a terrible rear valence on it too. The notch is not the way to go for top speed. I would I would rather have a sloped rear deck for that. And I'd rather have less windshield rake, and I'd rather have the hood be lower. I'd rather have a better front end. There would be lots of things, but you can overcome a lot of that stuff with power. 1979 Capri Can-Am fenders, major Mustang run 250, 255 easy. Can-Am fenders, like a wider one, a wider Can-Am or IMSA stuff is not the way to go for top speed. Do you think you'll get 450 wheel horsepower with an F-cam on a stock 5-liter? You can with boost. That's why they make Le Mans cars so small. Well, Le Mans cars not to the same extent as Formula One cars, but what they try to do is you try to balance aero versus drag. So at Le Mans, they go fairly fast, even though they've shortened Le Mans straightaway because they don't want them going 250 plus miles an hour anymore. So what you're trying to achieve is the thing that gives you the best lap time. So you can't take all of the aero. I mean, you can't take all of the downforce out of it because then it doesn't handle well in the corners, and there's lots of corners there. You can't, put all the downforce on it because then they'll be slow on the straightaway. You have to find the balance for them, the lap speed balance, that's going to get them the optimum lap speed for all of those things. It'd be better if you could have movable aero, which a lot of sanctioning bodies don't allow. Seen vortex generators on drag cars, notchbacks, Mustangs. I don't know if they work. They do work to some extent, but a vortex generator is still not going to allow the air to follow down a bad slope rear window. It will help have some of that stuff stay attached. But that's why when you look at a really good top speed car, a Streamliner, it has minimal frontal area. They also taper back into nothing on the back side of it also, so that you don't have a low pressure area back behind the car. If you look back behind the car, if you were to watch, like you can watch at El Mirage where they have dirt, and sometimes you can see it on the salt too. You can see the stuff like swirling around. That's not good. You want all the air to like go over the car and come back and taper back together. I got a 351 Windsor with an F-cam. Was wondering what turbo would help me get to 450 wheel horsepower. A GT45 will easily do that. That's right in that's wheelhouse. No, we don't want that. Look at the Can-Am flares that came stock on the Capri. It was a joke. Lighten up, Richard. Oh, so I'm supposed to interpret your humor from a text? I'm not that good. Just getting here. Winston, what's up? It's hard to sometimes it's hard to see sarcasm from text. Arriving late, what matters is what RPM the 400 horsepower arrives at. It doesn't matter. Well, at least it doesn't in our example. So the example was, Mike, so the example is they both make 400 horsepower. They do it at a different engine speed, but they both have gearing so that their peak horsepower number occurs at their RPM where that peak horsepower occurs at for their gearing to achieve 160 miles an hour. One of them just makes a lot more torque at that engine speed. So the question is, does that have any effect on top speed? What matters is, okay, we're displacing the air under the car with a V-shaped dam in front of the wheels can help the back end. Various cars getting light at speed, negative pressure zones under the car. Yeah, air management is a critical thing, both for both for drag, for lift, for lots of stuff. In fact, if you look at Formula One cars, we're even, and I don't know if they've outlawed this, but they're even using the exhaust, which is pretty significant at the power levels they're at. They're using the exhaust to energize the diffuser for more downforce. It works pretty well. Rod ratio crescents, yeah. And then you got to throw the dimpled in there, and then piston flipping and all of that stuff too. And dimpled pistons. Because, you know, the Shirley Temple pistons, dimples. Do you get it? Most people probably don't know who Shirley Temple is. Richard, have you ever seen a 68 to 69 Ford Torino GT run the Silver State? I don't remember a Torino being out there. I remember a really nice one that used to come into West Tech that had a Kazi motor in it. And it was all set up basically as a NASCAR deal. It was a street car that I think I drove around, but it had a cage and everything on it. It had the steel wheels and everything, and had a motor that was making like 750 or something. Because he wanted a car that would go 200. I'm like, dude, you're way past 200 with this car, because it was a Torino Talladega, and he had like one of Kazi's Boss motors in it, and I think it made 750 at the tire or something. It was a lot. And I'm because he wanted it to go 200, so he wanted to see if they would run it at 200 on the chassis dyno. I'm like, that doesn't mean anything, right? I said, I guarantee you that this car, if it has the gearing in it, which it did, because it had I think it had a Jericho trans in it. I said, I guarantee you that if you have enough gear for this power level, so that the car will go 200 at that RPM where that thing's making peak power. I said, it'll go way past 200. I mean, you think about what Cup cars would go with 750 horsepower or 750 horsepower at the tire. It's way more than 200. They stop using exhaust because it only work when you're on the gas. 704 woes. Of course, the Trans Am uses a different TV set than every other one in the Cadillac. That's what happens is you pick the only one, right, that does that. If you have a short rod, you can have a thicker piston crown. This helps with motors that could damage the crown. So you have to slow down, you lose downforce, that makes the car more dangerous. Okay. So it turns out the Rover V8 has a long stroke. Yeah, more displacement helps low speed power. I've heard that that's the case. I heard boost does that. I heard displacement does that. Compression does that. Runner length does that. Exhaust runner length also does that. There. Laser hair removal. I don't think I need that. The Hemi does what, Sean? What does the Hemi do? 351. Oh, 351 with an F cam, 450 wheel horsepower. Yeah, that's easy to do. You could do that. You could do 450 wheel horsepower NA with a 351, but it would be pretty cantankerous kind of thing. Is wet nitrous a must when trying to spray 100 shot and a fuel injected 302 without a tune? Will a dry setup work? No, a dry setup will work too, but how are you going to add the fuel? The only way I've seen dry shots work is if they had setups back in the day that would raise the fuel pressure using the nitrous pressure so that you add the extra fuel. You have to add the extra fuel. So however you're going to do that, you can, if you're not going to, you have to do it through the tune, or you have to raise the fuel pressure or something. You can't just add dry nitrous to it. That won't work. Honda has a program that calculates this. They use it since 97 when my friend Doug published it in New Zealand. just after he took the New Zealand land speed record in a CRX. He has a program that calculates what, Dean? It doesn't calculate. Doug's program doesn't calculate what I asked here. I wish my junk would make near that. I bet my 351 NA doesn't even make 275 to 300 wheel through a turbo 400. Yeah, but the turbo 400 soaks up all that power, right? The 351 did respond very well to heads, cam, and intake, as we saw in that video that I did when we did the Edelbrock stuff, or any of the other stuff too. If you put airflow research heads on it or whatever, because the stock stuff is so bad. I mean, even worse on a 351, if you have, the stock E7TE heads that flow 150 or 160, they're going to hold back a 302. In fact, they hold back a 289, probably hold back a 260. But the bigger you go in the motor, the more restrictive, relatively speaking, those heads are going to be. So on a 351, the 383, 390, 408, whatever, they'll be even more restrictive. So a 351 really responds to putting airflow research heads on or trick flow heads or anything. Roger, was Cleese McFarland that did the Flex Seal head gasket? They tried to, yeah. It does calculate how much horsepower is needed to do 160 miles an hour in any car or motorcycle. That's not, Dean, that's not the question. We're not asking that. That's not what we asked. That's what I was saying. He didn't calculate. He doesn't have an answer to the question that I asked today. I think he'd like NG automation. Allows you to build engines with whatever internal specifications you want and build a car that you can drive in a game. Okay, cool. Well, aggressive roller cam ramps would be beneficial on a low RPM engine. Yeah, I think ramp rate still has an effect there. Although cams, if you're talking about 2000 RPM, the cam itself is not going to have a whole bunch of effect there. Would you build a Boss with $20,000 or a K-Series with $20,000? It would depend on what you're trying to do. I wouldn't build a Boss for Bonneville if I was trying to run in a 2-liter or under class at Bonneville. So they would be different things. Winston, he has 12 of what? Turbo 400 stock has a huge diameter torque converter, 14 inches, lots of mass. Switch to an 11 or a 10. And that's going to change the stall speed, right? Love the video, but I should get started on my 8.8 diff maintenance. What are you doing to it? Are you checking the lash on it, checking bearings, checking shims? Do you have a video explaining the relationship between piston to valve clearance and high RPM? Those two things are not really related. Piston to valve clearance would be more a function of camshaft. Unless you get into unless RPM brings like valve train instability, and then you have instability where you don't have control of the valve anymore, and then you lessen the piston to valve clearance. But it's a really out there kind of thing. I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. It does, but you should be shifting way before anything like that's happening. So you'd rather run a K-Series at Bonneville? I would rather run a K-Series in a 2-liter or under class where that motor will excel than run a Coyote, which isn't a 2-liter. So I wouldn't want to make a 2-liter Coyote or a Boss or whatever you're talking about. Oh, Winston, you bought more intake manifolds? Okay. You replied to someone's comment once that we don't have enough piston to valve for 9,000 RPM. That doesn't sound like me. Are you sure you got that response right? Because piston to valve isn't RPM. We might not have enough piston to valve for the camshaft that we would need to make power at 9,000 RPM in a given combination, because the camshaft that you would need would be really, really big. And so that camshaft won't fit, particularly if you have a stock short block or something that has limited piston to valve. But the RPM and the piston to valve are not the related thing. The camshaft that you would need, like I said, is a related thing. For a given cam optimized for 2,000 RPM, which is preferable? I don't think you're going to see I don't think you might not even see a measurable change in the stuff that you're talking about at 2,000 RPM. I have the same stall on mine. Who is your preferred converter manufacturer? I answered no in the poll. I hope I'm right for the wrong reason. And will I learn something more? No, you just got to read the question. The question was, and I went over this more than just the question is Dean. The question was, if we have one motor that makes like a 302 that makes peak power or makes 400 horsepower at 7,000 RPM, and we have a 351 that makes 400 horsepower at 5,000 RPM, one of those makes 300 foot-pounds. The other one makes 420 foot-pounds. If it takes 400 horsepower to go 160 miles an hour, and each of those has optimized gearing so that 160 miles an hour occurs where they're making their horsepower peak of 400 horsepower, does the fact that one of those has a lot more torque, does it have any effect on top speed? It's a very, very narrow, specific question here. How much power am I losing having a cone air filter suck on the mass air meter in my 302 Mustang? Do you have an open cone filter in the engine bay? Because that's a bad idea. You need to have cold air for that. The cone filter itself probably flows as much as the air box did anyway, but you should not have an open element filter in the engine bay. You should have it covered, or have the cone filter inside the fender well and just have ducting going over to that. Do you ever get tempted to head out to the garage and read all those old Mustang magazines? I actually threw all of my magazines away. I had boxes and boxes and boxes of those that I just kept moving with me. And before, I would go back to those, and then we would just go online for information. And I stopped, I probably had, I don't know, 30 or 40 of those boxes of muscle Mustangs and fast forwards and hot rods and all the things I had over the years. And I ended up just not wanting to move them anymore. Saw your Outlaw Street Racing Boss or K Series like they're mortal enemies to Honda guys. I know you're wanting you're angling towards some sort of specific thing. You want an answer here and you're trying to direct it. So just tell me what your motivation is here. I don't understand how people are mortal enemies or whatever. I don't understand any of that. Everybody that makes any kind of engine or car faster, those people should just be bros. There should be no conflict there. I remember when I did some driving instruction, it explained to me that horsepower is how hard you hit the wall and torque is how far you move it. Okay. Less RPM is better for durability. I would have jumped into the trash. Yeah, there's a lot of good things there. I still have some of the books that I kept, but the magazines, yeah, there was endless stuff. Just can't pass a sweetheart deal. 2 LT1s, manifolds with bigger injectors, and one machine distributor. Yeah, BS. I think you get to a point where, like we showed in some of these motors, especially when you're not talking about RPM, added lift did very little. So at 2000 RPM, that's what I'm talking about. You're in an area where that's not going to come into play. There are probably better cams than a stock cam, whatever your stock cam is. I think that that's the case. But I think if you go from a 500 to a 550 lift cam or a 550 to a 600 lift, and you're talking about something that's 180 or 190 degrees of duration, I just don't think at 2000 RPM, I don't think you're going to see very much. And if you're running a blower, I don't think it's going to be a consideration. What do you think about ACE fuel injection for the 302? I've never tested it, so I don't know. Tell me your motivation. Well, I get people trying to steer conversations all the time. Like they ask a question and they don't really care about the answer to that, because what they want is 2 steps past that. So then they ask the next question, then they ask the next question, and what they're trying to do is get you to say something that they want you to say, so then they could go somewhere else and poke that and say, "See, Richard said this," or whatever. It's just silly. Both engines are achieving 400 horsepower, 160 miles an hour. It just doesn't matter. Yeah, I that's what I said. I agree. If it's 400 horsepower and everything was right, that number is going to be that number. That's going to equate to that mile an hour. And I think that is the way to go. Yeah, Sean, the question that you're asking is, do I like Honda motors better than I don't even know what you mean by Boss motor. Are you talking about a Boss like Coyote motor, or are you talking about a Boss 429? I don't even know what that is. So that's what you're asking. You're not asking this thing that you're trying to ask. You're asking that. And I don't do that. I don't pick one over the other. Like I said, I choose whatever I'm going to do based on the thing that I'm trying to achieve. If I'm trying to get good fuel mileage, then I would pick a combination that's going to do that. If I'm trying to go to Bonneville and I want to run something at Bonneville, I pick the combination that's going to achieve the record in the class that I'm trying to do that. Those things would be completely different. And you're not going to build a Bonneville car for $20,000. Not for, that's not a thing anymore. Then we end up talking about Q-jets for the rest of our lives. That's right. Got panels covering holes in the towers. How much would it pick up if I drop the air filter close to the fog light? It doesn't have to be near the fog light. I don't necessarily want the thing to get pressurized air if that's what you're trying to do. You just need to get a cold air source. So however you do that, could be the side of the radiator, could be in the fender well, could be down low. You don't want to grab, obviously, water down low. So that's a consideration too. But anywhere that you can, where you have a constant, unrestricted supply of ambient air, that's the best way to go. We're just looking for justification for our purchase ideas. Tim, I'm in full support of everybody here for the thing that they want to do. What I'm not in support of is anybody, for any reason, thinking that the thing that they're doing is better than everybody else, the things that they're doing. That's the problems that we run into with politics and religion and any other decision that we're making, is that people, for whatever reason, want, oh, this is the best thing ever. Coyotes are the best, or LSs are the best, or LTs or K series or whatever their thing is. That's not the case. They can all be individually good. People have a hard time with that. It's amazing how few people talk about lower RPM power production. Tell me your motivation. I'll give you the engine. Utah, it's a hard enough thing getting people to tell me, okay, what's the best turbo? What's the best camshaft? What's the best intake manifold? Whoa. What are we trying to do here? How much power do you want to make for the turbo? Like, what RPM do you want to run? Like, for the camshaft, we have to ask a number of questions. And I'm sure people, especially people that don't understand camshafts, that they don't understand why you need so much information to find the camshaft that's right for them. They just want some magical camshaft that does the thing and same thing for an intake manifold or cylinder heads or whatever. Look, whatever you're trying to achieve is your thing. So there are guys that are sharp out there that can help you achieve that. You just have to give them the guidelines. I don't care about idle quality. All I care about is maximum peak power. Okay, good. That's one camshaft. Well, I want it to use a stock converter and I don't want any chop. Okay, that's a different camshaft. And then there's all these spaces in the middle where lots and lots of camshafts may be able to suit their needs. And a lot of guys don't realize that, hey, look, there's like 6 or 8 or 10 or 100 camshafts that if we put that in there, you would be happy with. There's not going to be just one. And it's hard getting people to understand. Same thing with a turbo. Will you like a GT45? Yeah, probably. Will you like a 7875? Yes, you'll probably like that. You want to make big power and you put an S475 or an S480 or whatever. Will you like that? Yeah, if that's what you're trying to do. But if you put an S480 in and you have a 4.8 with the stock camshaft and you got something that doesn't have any gear or converter in it, you're not going to be as happy as if you had a smaller cam or a smaller turbo on there. So, let's get you what you want, man. When was the last time you saw a dyno pull from 1300 RPM? That there's no reason ever to do that. There's no time when you're ever at wide open throttle at 1300 RPM. I'd like to see that. I want to be in the car when somebody does that. And I mean, short of being a diesel. Once you can articulate your goals fully, the right combination becomes real obvious. Yeah, it goes from general to specific. We narrow stuff down, and that's the way people get answers on stuff. And that's the way we look at. If I go start a Bonneville project, it starts from, hey, what do we want to do? Sometimes with Bonneville, the reverse happens for me. I go and look in the record book and go, oh, that's a soft record. Okay, can we do something for that? Yeah, we can. We can make a motor that would easily do that. That's how my thing works, is like, oh, that like G class is only 138 miles an hour. That's this much power. Well, yeah, we can easily make that much power. So that's, all of those things work like that. When is the best time? Let's see. Scrolling. Most important thing to understand with this stuff is that what your goals are. Yeah, we got that. I just scrolled back too far. I'm getting there. Richard is yet to buy my 300 inline 6 beater van. Where is that? What country is that in, or what state is that in? I have no idea what the best is. I was considering a 5.3 Forge build, redoing my 351 Windsor, which is already in the car, or even possibly a car big block Chevy, because I want a car that sounds good, which I don't have. You could make your 351 sound good, right? Leave your 351 in there, take the top end off, put a cam in it, put GT40 heads on it, put a carbureted intake manifold on it, and a nitrous plate. Best low RPM build is a Cadillac 500 with a blower. That would do it. This is really build it and test it out. Yep. What about part throttle dyno testing? I have done 50% throttle videos up. I'd like to learn more about, and I watch Richard a lot. Wide open throttle at 1200 RPM and high boost. Just set the timing at -5 degrees, or just set it for diesel mode. I hear the valve clatter and detonation. Bonneville is super endurance. Bonneville would be more endurance than drag racing is, but less than the Silver State and less than NASCAR or these multi-hour or NASCAR or Le Mans would be super endurance. I don't think I've seen an actual intentional part throttle dyno pull. You need to go look at the video where I did 50% throttle, because that video is up. At what point does power to weight ratio start to transition into power versus aerodynamic? I don't know an actual number for that. And I think that's going to vary with the aero of the vehicle versus the weight of the vehicle. But it'd be interesting to see what that transition point is for. And it would be better to look at it for, like, let's look at it for a truck, and then some sort of car like a Camaro, and then something super slippery, not a new Corvette, an older Corvette, like a C4 Corvette, or a Honda Insight or something that's like super aero. It would be interesting to see where that transition was for those different things, because they will be different. Make a 351 sound good, 8.4 2-into-1 exhaust. So you want to do a tri-Y thing, and you think that will make them sound good? It's in the Southwest Wisconsin. You can lay down a 4x8 3/4 plywood sheet and bring some marine grade, some good stuff. Bring all your rusty LS engines back to California with it. It'd be a scary drive. What? That has the inline 6-cylinder in it. Will that get over the hills that we have to get over? Yeah, BS. That's why I did that. I purposely did 50% throttle stuff so that people would have that. Le Mans or Lemons. Lemons is the same kind of thing, although none of the Lemons races I ever did ever went 24 hours straight like Le Mans does. The Lemons, they always stopped and then started again. BS, just do a search for it. Aero is huge for top speed. Yep. How do you add fuel to run a wet nitrous setup with fuel injected 302 setup? Do you tee off the return? Yeah, normally that's what we do. There's a Schrader valve. There's a Schrader valve on a factory fuel rail on a Ford. So you can tee off of the Schrader valve. You just take the Schrader assembly out of it. They have a line that you screw onto there, and that goes over to that line goes over to the fuel solenoid. And so it always has pressure on it. And then just when you activate it, it sprays the fuel in based on the jetting that you have in there. You don't need a tune. The nitrous already supplies nitrous and fuel based on the jetting and the fuel pressure with roughly the right combination. All the jetting that I've seen them supply these with typically overfuel these things. And we usually either end up taking fuel supply away, or we just add more nitrous to whatever their fuel supply is. Tri-way all the way to single exhaust makes a flat, plain-ish crank sound. Okay. I want a complete guide to swap Coyote into my F-250. Where I live, there's no one who does the swaps. I'm in Saudi Arabia. Yeah, I haven't ever seen that, but I don't ever remember searching for a DIY kind of thing. I think that the 50% throttle is I think it's an LS. My F-250 is a 91 4x4. What engine is in your 91 right now? Is it a 302 or a 351? What motor's in it right now? So we're going to close out our poll at 68%, and we got 1 minute left. So we're saying no, 68%, but 32% said it does matter. How long do you think a bone stock 5.3 with 240,000 miles will last with the G38? You don't have to worry about engine longevity. What you have to worry about is, did you put ring gap in it because you're running boost on it? And is the tune correct? If you have all of that stuff right, it'll last a really long time. Vanilla sent for a few months and now is a miss. What would you say is most likely the culprit? I don't know. Is a lifter sticking? Is an injector not firing? And for it's that for a few months. It might be an injector that's clogged. Is there any contact information? No, I mean, you can ask any questions that you have here. I don't do swaps, so I just do the engine performance stuff. Richard, has anyone besides Callaway ever tried to break the Sledgehammer's top speed record with a C4? The Sledgehammer doesn't hold any records. It just went out and went fast as a Corvette, but it didn't set any land speed records or anything. And there's lots of other cars that go way faster than that. Now, even production cars now go faster than that. Ring gap is a must thing do. Ring gap for boost is, I would say, is a must do thing. A G38, how small of a turbo is that? And then you can look on the motor that's missing, Ben. You can do a compression test on it and make sure that that's all even. That might give you an idea of which cylinder it would be. You can look at the plugs. Serious about selling my Vans, an OBD2 300 inline 6, and I want $600. I can't afford it. That would be cool if I thought it could tow the Omni back, because I have to go pick that up in Ohio. $120 eBay turbo. Sledgehammer is the most legendary C4 Corvette ever built. Yeah, I don't. There's not been any faster C4 Corvette, right? That's pretty fast. That's cool that they decided to go out and do that. I think that when guys like decide, hey, look, you know what we need to do. Oh, sure, that we need to go 250 plus miles an hour. Yeah, that's awesome. Not driving the Omni back. I still haven't decided on that. Dean, what do you got going on there? You're having cookies? And Lingenfelder doesn't get enough credit for that. And right now, as soon as I leave here, I'm going to be loading up the 400-inch Ford versus the 400-inch Chevy video. That's done. I'm done editing that. It's going to go up right after I get off here, so you guys will get to take a look at that, and you guys can root for your favorite Ford or favorite Chevy, whichever one. People could bicker back and forth about which one is the best, Ford versus Chevy. Kind of cheated with Sledgehammer Racers tape, but that's the thing. They weren't in any class, so there's no rule when you're out there. The rule was we want to go fast, and here's how we're going to go fast, and they did. Are you driving with a big grin? Do you see sheeps and goats? 2 of them, 2x2. Driving with a big grin. Yep. I can't wait to argue in the comments. That's good. That's why we're all here, right? I'd like to see an Edelbrock versus Holly ins and outs video. Oh, the difference of the carburetors. That's a video I would like to do with Brule. But the VRS carburetor, when you test it, it works really good. Shelby Omni. Yeah, that's what mine is. It's the GLHS. The S is in air quotes, so. I'm hoping they tie so nobody has to argue. Sean, that's so cute that you'd think that even if they tied, that people wouldn't argue. You know they would, right? So you're making a 400M into a Cleaver or a Windsor? No, it's a Windsor, 400-inch Windsor. Richard, didn't John Lingenfelder run the Sledgehammer drivetrain at Firebird? Well, he built that motor, and I think that he did the driving. Did he do the driving for when they tested the Sledgehammer? There. They'd argue about the testing methodology. Well, and Sean, you know, I'm smarter than making it an even thing, because then otherwise people would have nothing to argue about. So one of them has nitrous, one of them has a blower. You know, they got to have something to argue about. Do you have any air-cooled VW motor builds? I don't have any air-cooled stuff. I've done some stuff with a 73 Super Beetle that I owned for a while, but we never did any dyno testing with it. And I did some stuff with a VW company where we were using EFI, Weber style, like stack EFI, to replace the carburetors, and we did some testing with them, but not any stuff at West Tech. Jonathan, you can run a T4 or a T6. It doesn't matter. The turbo that you choose to make will be a function of how much power you want to make, and then also, to some extent, the availability. Like if you get an S475, a lot of those will come as T6s. And if you try to find a T4 version of that, it's a lot more money. So some guys just go with a T6. And on a 408, a T6 S475, if you're trying to do 1,000 horsepower or less, will work just fine because you've got enough motor to drive that. I upgraded my turbo to a 90 millimeter, seeing a lot of back pressure, and I thought maybe custom manifolds might help, or should I go with a T6? What turbo do you have on there? Have you compared a Whipple screw with a similar size Eaton roots? Yeah, it's not even close. The twin screw is a better blower. Someone would be like, if the cam had a tighter LSA, then Chevy would win. It did. There is going to be that. Which is awesome. Right on. I was trying to build my sandrail motor. On that note, got to save some of your stuff for, you know, there's still tonight. You know, don't got to get it all done today. We can bicker some more tonight about more stuff. So I just got to come up with some more things, you know, to talk about. I'll see you guys all tonight.